banana and an orange? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, and do we really care? Is this really a big issue? I mean, I would probably care if they were going to, the best restaurant in Wellington, every day as a group to continue their discussions, or they were getting foie gras and caviar sent in. But really,
it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
I mean, some sandwiches. That's right. A couple of sarnies and some fruit.
Provide them with sandwiches.
And also, I do think that there is an interesting opportunity for talk. I mean, sometimes in meetings, or actually quite a lot in meetings, people don't say what they think, and they wait till after the meeting, and then they have another little meeting over their sandwich. I mean, I think the opportunity for socialisation around the business discussion is quite important.
I agree.
And it's a sandwich. I mean, hello.
No, keep the sandwiches.
Yeah, keep those sandwiches.
Actually, spend more. Spend more. You're a counsellor. Why not sort of have the odd, go crazy, have the odd, what would you have?
Oh, what, bottle of Coke?
Personalised Coke, yes.
Personalised Coke. Hey, Andy.
Yeah, it's coming up to 5 o'clock. I wanted to stick this in. This is very interesting. Just when you thought Hillary Clinton was well and truly out of the politics game, she claims she's under enormous pressure to run against Donald Trump for the presidency next year. Well, she
Monica
said. The former Democratic presidential nominee has refused to rule out running, telling the BBC, quote, "Never say never." She is absolutely not in her plans, but she does think about it a lot. And many people have told her to consider it. There are currently 17 Democrats vying for the party's nomination in 2020. Genuine question, Chris, is who is telling her to run?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, isn't it? Because there's been no evidence of anyone of any influence of any import.
Probably Chelsea is telling her to run.
Yeah,
and,
the gardener.
Bill,
I don't know. Is it the mailman?
Do you see an appetite around the panel? Cindy, you first. Do you see an appetite for a Clinton-Trump face-off?
Nope.
Face-off?
Oh, no.
Why
Honestly,
not?
I mean, it's not a sort of graceful approach. She lost the election because, for a range of reasons, whether it was subversive Russians or whatever, she lost the election. And I think that the Democrats have a range of candidates. I mean, they've got so many, but they've actually got better candidates. I think Hillary's just got too much baggage. And I mean, are there enough pantsuits still left? Are there? No, look, there's a lot better candidates, I think, than Hillary. Who
are you liking? I'm
liking, is it Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris. I'm loving her. She's Latino, I think, is she? Anyway, ethnic minority. I couldn't really tell from her photo, but her record of voting in the House, and this is, where the rubber meets the road, is very liberal. However, she's a prosecutor and has,
All right, so you like the African-American candidate, Kamala Harris. What about you, Chris? Who are you liking?
Tulsi Gabbard. But I think because I just have a real fondness for Hawaii.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren.
Of you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could do it. Bernie Sanders, either of you?
No, he's in the Hillary basket. He should pick up his kitty and go home.
He's probably too old. It's a big job. You've got to be fit.
Indeed. Chris Wekaira and City Commissioner, thank you very much for being with me today. It's been a pleasure. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint next. See you tomorrow for Friday's show. Marty Stevens and Peter Elliott. Till then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere nei, the man accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane, says he sobbed and vomited as he buried her body in the Waitakere Ranges. Hundreds of farmers march on Parliament claiming forestry is ripping the guts out of their livelihoods. The new head of the Royal Commission into Abuse, Judge Coral Shaw, apologises to her Survivors Advisory Panel. And we talk to an Australian woman whose family battled 10-metre high flames to save their home from an out-of-control bushfire. The case of convicted paedophile Peter Ellis makes it to the country's top court 2 months after his death. And relief and regret as the Euthanasia bill is voted through Parliament, but the debate will live on.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The man accused of murdering Grace Millane told police he confessed about burying the British backpacker so her family could have closure. The 27-year-old is in the High Court at Auckland, charged with murdering Ms Millane after a Tinder date in Auckland's CBD last December. The man initially lied about the last time he saw the young woman, but then admitted he choked her during sex and woke up to find her dead in his room. In his second police interview, the man's lawyer, Ian Brookie, asks why he gave the police more information.
Because of her family. Because I want her family to know that it wasn't intentional. But I also want her family to have closure.
The accused showed the police where he buried Ms Millane's body in the Waitakere Ranges. Ms Millane's mother shook her head as the DVD interview was played to the court. The Crown called its final witness this afternoon and has closed its case. The trial will resume on Monday. Judge Coral Shaw has been appointed the new chairperson of the Royal Commission into Abuse in State and Faith-Based Care. It's inquiring into what happened to children, young people and vulnerable adults in care between 1950 and 1999. Judge Shaw replaces Sir Anand Satyanand, whose resignation took effect from today. Andrew McRae reports.
The Internal Affairs Minister Tracy Martin says Judge Shaw, who is one of the current commissioners, is extremely well qualified for the role and her appointment will ensure continuity for the Commission's work. The Commission's Executive Director Mervyn Singham says Coral Shaw has a long history of fighting for human rights as a lawyer, and as a judge she presided over many cases both here and overseas. Judge Shaw says she will continue to engage with survivors of abuse and hear their stories. She says New Zealand has irrefutable legal obligations to protect the fundamental rights of its people. Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
The Chief Ombudsman says senior Christchurch City Council managers altered reports that reflected negatively on the council when responding to information requests. The council has been slammed in an investigation revealing how the executive leadership team controlled the flow of information when responding to requests from the public. It takes aim at former Chief Executive Carleen Edwards, who left the job last year for failing to deal with the problem. Peter Bosher, who has looked into how dozens of public entities have complied with the Act, says he has never seen breaches on such a scale.
It was to do with reports being altered. It was to do with incomplete information being supplied to elected officials. It was almost an editing of the position to suit senior leadership. You'll see that this is not light stuff, and I regarded it very seriously.
The council says it accepts the report and is working to improve its processes. The Mental Health Foundation says new armed units being trialled by the police will result in people experiencing mental health crises being shot. The special patrols are aimed at cutting down response times and serious call-outs when firearms are involved. The Foundation's Chief Executive, Sean Robinson, says tasers are disproportionately used in cases involving mental illness, and he believes the same will occur with firearms.
All the evidence says that if the police are armed, then people who are experiencing a mental health crisis will get shot. We know this from the use of tasers. So if you arm police with guns in a routine way, the same thing is going to happen, only this time they'll be shooting them with bullets.
Sean Robinson says Māori and Pacific people have higher rates of mental illness, so they'll be shot more often. If National's elected next year, its leader Simon Bridges says it could roll back any plan to replace RNZ and TVNZ with one public broadcaster. That proposal could be considered by Cabinet within weeks. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
An advisory group, including the two media companies and a range of public sector agencies, says the status quo is unsustainable. It's recommending the creation of a whole new entity with a public service mandate funded by both the Crown and commercial revenue. Mr Bridges says he recognises the challenges facing the media, but one single state broadcaster would dominate the media landscape, which would be bad for democracy. The Prime Minister won't confirm any details, but says doing nothing is not an option. When asked if Labour would campaign on any major change, Jacinda Ardern said the party campaigned on boosting public broadcasting in 2017. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The space sector has contributed almost $1.7 billion to New Zealand's economy in the last financial year. A report released by the Economic Development Minister today reveals the industry employs 12,000 people, both directly and indirectly. The report by Deloitte was commissioned by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and Phil Twyford says it shows New Zealand's space economy is driven almost entirely by the private sector. The New Zealand company Rocket Lab has played a key part in the growth. It's coming up to 5:05. The All Whites coach Danny Hay says he had no hesitation in handing Winston Reid the captain's armband for tomorrow morning's match against Ireland in Dublin. Reid will make just his fourth appearance for New Zealand in 3 years and has spent 18 months on the sidelines at English Premier League side West Ham because of injury. It's Hay's first match in charge of the side, and he says having Winston Reid there has been a major plus.
He holds a huge amount of respect and mana amongst the group. And I just look at the way the young players respond to his sheer presence in the environment, and it's massive. It's a big plus. You know, they respond really well around him.
Danny Hay, the All Whites coach. The New Zealand women's basketball team will have a rare home court advantage tonight when they play an Olympic qualifying tournament in Auckland. The world number 8 China, 18th ranked Korea and 35th ranked Torferns and world number 50 Philippines are competing in the next few days as part of the build-up to the Tokyo Olympics next year. The Torferns captain, Kalani Purcell, says they're used to hostile crowds overseas and can't wait to turn the tables.
Because usually we play in front of a Chinese crowd or something like that, and because they're such diehard fans, it's quite difficult to play in front of those kind of crowds. To be able to have that home court advantage, I guess, to have the crowd on your side is awesome.
New Zealand's opening match tonight is against the Philippines. That's the news.
A major shake-up of public broadcasting.
It is still at early stages, but I do understand that it does have momentum in terms of this one specific proposal.
I mean, Kevin Kenrick at TVNZ's bonus is more than Paul Thompson's salary. TVNZ reporters will be paid at a much higher rate than RNZ reporters. The functions of the organisations have just been so different.
I'll turn my microphone off. We'll be the first for the high jump when the balloon goes up.
Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, disaster risk reduction expert Robert Glasser on why Australia is in uncharted territory with threats from increasingly hot, dry weather. And after 10, departing All Blacks captain Kieran Reid looks back on that World Cup and his remarkable All Black career. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine. Isolated showers becoming confined to the west tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country and Wairarapa. Showers with possible squally thunderstorms tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine with high cloud. Bulla to Fiordland and Stewart Island, periods of rain with heavy falls. Thunderstorms north of the glaciers tonight. Nelson and Marlborough north of Kaikoura ranges. Showers becoming widespread this evening with possible thunderstorms and hail. Fine weather tomorrow apart from scattered showers in the evening. Kaikoura coast, Canterbury and North Otago. Isolated showers, possible thunderstorms until tonight, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Southland, excluding Stewart Island, Central Otago and Dunedin. Showers with possible thunderstorms tonight, high cloud and scattered rain tomorrow. Chatham Islands, periods of rain and low cloud. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The man accused of murdering Grace Millane told the police he sobbed and vomited as he put her body into a suitcase the day after she died in his apartment. Video footage of the 27-year-old man's second police interview has been played to the jury today as his trial in the High Court in Auckland continues. In the interview, the accused breaks down as he backtracks on his initial story, admitting he buried Ms Millane's body in a shallow grave in the Waitakere Ranges. Our reporter Sarah Robson is covering the case and filed this story.
The man accused of murdering Grace Millane had been interviewed by the police once before, on December the 6th, 5 days after the British backpacker was last seen in central Auckland. In that interview, he told Detective Sergeant Ewan Settle he and Ms Millane had parted ways about 8 o'clock the night of her disappearance. But when he was brought in for questioning again 2 days later, he changed his story.
Tell me what happened last Saturday.
from the beginning.
Yeah.
The accused canvassed the details of their Tinder date, meeting up at Sky City, talking and drinking at a couple of bars.
We kept talking about life. We kept talking about other people. Most of the time we were sitting there, we were just kissing. I think we were both into each other.
He said they were both quite drunk.
I remember leaving Bluestone. I remember, the next thing I remember after that is being in the room with Grace.
Up in his apartment, he said Ms Millane started talking about the erotic novel 50 Shades of Grey and things she liked doing during sex. He said they had rough sex, which included some choking, and took pictures of each other. He then went and had a shower.
And then all I remember is falling asleep in the shower. And then waking up. It would have been, can't remember exactly when it was, but it was still dark. I crawled back into bed. Initially I thought Grace had left.
When he woke up several hours later, he described what he found.
I saw that she was lying on the floor. I saw that she had blood coming from her nose. I screamed, I yelled out at her, and I tried to move her to see if she was awake. I need to stop. I need to go.
After a short break, he continued his story.
I didn't believe what had happened. I was just terrified and scared.
That morning he went out and bought a suitcase. When he returned to his apartment, he didn't know what to do and said he tried to overdose on his medication. He said it didn't seem right to put Ms Millane's body in the bag. He went out again and bought cleaning products and met a friend at a bar in Ponsonby. When he returned to the City Life Hotel, he struggled to describe what he did next.
I spewed up a few times because I couldn't put Grace in the bag. Because all I could think about was what we shared the night before.
He broke down again as he talked about what he did.
I put her in the bag. And the whole time I just kept saying, I'm sorry.
The accused said he put the suitcase in the back of a rental car he had picked up. The next day he got up early and headed to West Auckland, where he bought a shovel at a hardware store.
I didn't know where to go. I ended up driving towards the Waitakaris.
The man described pulling over in an area of bush near a reservoir.
I went into the bush, I dug a hole. And I sat there.
He said he tried to overdose again.
I went and got the suitcase and I put it in the hole and I covered the hole.
Detective Sergeant Ewan Settle asked if he called for help when he discovered Ms Millane's body on his apartment floor.
I dialed 111, but I didn't hit the button because I was scared how bad it looked.
Why did you think it looked bad?
Well, there's a dead person in my room.
Uh-huh.
He told the police he tried to clean up the blood on the floor and that he dumped Ms Millane's belongings, including her clothes, in a rubbish bin in Albert Park. At this stage, the police didn't know exactly where her body was buried.
Our understanding is that you're going to be potentially in a position to go and show us where Grace is. Is that correct?
Yeah.
At the end of the interview, Detective Sergeant Ewan Settle asks the man this question.
Did you kill Grace Millane? Okay. You're under arrest for the murder of Grace Millane on or about the 2nd of December.
The man's lawyer, Ian Brookie, asked him whether he had intended to kill Ms Millane. He replied that he hadn't. Mr Brookie also asked his client why he didn't tell this story when he first spoke to the police.
Because of her family. Because I want her family to know that it wasn't intentional. But I also want her family to have closure.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The new head of the Royal Commission into Abuse concedes there are fences to be mended in gaining the trust of survivors working with the investigation. Former District Court Judge Coral Shaw replaces Sir Anand Satanyan as chair following his resignation. Judge Shaw handled the public fallout after it was revealed a convicted paedophile, who was the partner of a member of the Survivors Advisory Group, had mixed with abuse survivors at Commission-related functions without their knowledge. The Commission has since introduced compulsory vetting for advisors and their support people. I asked the new chair, why her for the top job?
Well, the Minister selected me, so the Minister obviously felt I was the right person for the job. But I think the important thing is that I'm somebody who's had a year's experience on the present Royal Commission and that I'm able to bring some continuity. I think a new person coming in would have had to do a lot of catch-up, if you like. So I'm in the fortunate position of having had the experience of working under the direction of Sir Anand Satin and learning from him, and it means that I'm able to continue the work of the Commission, hopefully without any disruption.
So how is this Commission going to be any different under your leadership? Are there any changes that you think are needed?
None immediately, but in fact we are at a very interesting time in the life of the Commission, because we've reached the end of our establishment phase. We've spent the last year working very hard at building processes, building an organisation, connecting with survivors, engaging with community groups and getting ourselves ready to do the real work. And so at this point, and that's what Sir Anand has led us through. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to pick up where he left off and moving forward now straight into all the seriously hard work that we have to do, talking to survivors, holding public hearings, engaging with the community. So nothing different, just a new phase.
Well, the Commission hasn't been without its hurdles so far. I want to talk about the Survivors Advisory Group. What value do they bring to the Commission?
They're an important part of the Commission, and they're required under the terms of reference to be a group of survivors who can give advice to the commissioners about the work and the way the work can be done. There have been difficulties. There've been a large and disparate group who've had to come from all parts of the country. There have been people with some issues that they've had to deal with in confronting the very raw revelations that they bring and that others bring, and that's made it a very difficult dynamic. But
so how is your relationship with them then?
Well, at the moment, I wouldn't say that I had a deep relationship with them, but one of the very first things that I'm going to do is to meet with them when I can. We're already sending out some communications to them to explain where we're up to at the moment. But as I said, we're in a new phase now, and now we're moving into the serious operational time. Now is the time when we really badly need to hear the voices of survivors as we go into the next phase of work. So that's what I'll be working on doing, building up a firm relationship with them.
When do you imagine you're going to meet with them? Because obviously vetting is underway. You introduced vetting for this group, and they were advised that there will be no contact with commissioners or the Commission while vetting is underway. So when do you plan to meet them?
Well, the vetting is underway, and we've now received back, I think, from virtually every one of our Survivor Advisory Group, the relevant forms that we needed them to fill out. There's a few more things we need to go through terms of checking up on their well-being and the like. In fact, we just had a session yesterday when we were planning the next phase of finishing off that. And vetting is a rather difficult word. You know, vetting, you think, police vetting. This is checking up on their well-being, checking up on their availability, checking up on their capacity to do the work.
It's also checking on convictions, though, isn't it, Judge Shaw?
Oh, yes, that's part of it, and that's the vetting part of it. But the rest of it is, and we've done that, the rest of it is really about their well-being. And getting them in a place where they can do the job that we want them to do, and that is to give us some very important insider advice about survivors.
Because Checkpoint has spoken to a number of individuals on the survivors group, and to be honest, they're not that thrilled with your appointment. And this follows on from the way they view the handling of the issue of the paedophile. There is a trust issue in their view. Do you see that there are some fences to be mended there, and how are you going to do it?
Absolutely, there are some fences to be mended. One of the biggest issues that the Commission has faced from the beginning, and we will continue to face to the very end, is gaining the trust of survivors. Survivors have been abused by the state. The survivors have been abused by the churches that they were involved with. And so anything that looks like the state or an institution is automatically, I think, they see us as part of that abusing organisation. And the only way that we can get over that is to demonstrate that we are worthy of trust. Now that I see as one of my major tasks, to be started quickly and as soon as possible.
Because to go straight to the point, some of that group is concerned that you minimised their experiences around this issue of the paedophile, and they see it as the same kind of minimising and denials that they were faced with as kids when they tried to disclose abuse. So what's your response to that concern?
Well, the first thing is I'm really sorry if they felt that I was minimising it. I really apologise to them if that is the impression they got. Certainly that was not my intention. And I'm more than willing to apologise to them for doing that. But
you haven't done that already?
No, I haven't. And the reason is that we've just come out of a very heavy 2 weeks contextual hearing in Auckland, where we were literally in a hearing room for all those days, and we haven't had time. We've just come out of that. But now there's the moment that we've got a little bit of space, a little bit of time, and it's certainly a high priority for me. I don't expect them to trust me completely from the very beginning. Some of them may never trust me. But the reality is I've got the job and I have to do the best I can to try and build some trust and confidence in the job that I'm doing.
If they don't trust you, how can you work together? Because isn't that what a fundamental base of this whole commission is trust, is it not?
Absolutely. Well, it's their decision if they want to work with me or not. I mean, I can't make them. We've invited them to be part of the Survivor Advisory Group. If they feel they can't trust me, then they have a choice, and that sounds harsh, and I would respect that choice.
But they're crucial to your work, aren't they?
They are, but there are other survivors out there. There are other people who are very keen to become part of the Survivor Advisory Group. And I can say that we're looking in the future to be organising this in a way that probably, hopefully, will be more congenial to them, more meeting their individual needs, maybe small focus groups where they can feel as though they can properly get their say. I think they've probably not had the feeling that they haven't had an opportunity properly to express their views. So we're looking at these ways to bring them in, with the main aim of getting their advice, which is what we badly need.
So how many people from that survivors group have resigned or left since it was established?
I think 2, 3. I think we've got at least 2, and there's another person who's considering their position.
And for what reasons have they left?
Some have felt uncomfortable in the group. The group dynamics have been rather difficult. Some find that it's not the sort of thing that they want to do anymore. They've got their own personal reasons for doing that. Those who have resigned have written very fulsome and generous letters, and which we have accepted.
Have any of them raised issues of trust and confidence in the Commission as reasons for their resignations?
Quite honestly, I wouldn't like to answer that because I can't recall specifically the letters which we received over the last month or so, and so I wouldn't like to say no, and I wouldn't like to say yes because I'm not confident. I don't have the letters with me.
And that is Judge Coral Shaw, who's just been appointed the new chairperson of the Royal Commission into Abuse in State and Faith-Based Care. It is 25 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Particularly interested if you're participating in that commission. Do you trust it and have faith in the new chair? The political battle lines have been drawn over the future of public broadcasting, with National coming out strongly against a plan to create one public broadcaster to replace RNZ and TVNZ. RNZ has been leaked details of the plan as the government grapples with the best way to shore up the media industry under siege from online giants like Google and Facebook. The government won't confirm any details, but it's not resiling from its determination to make substantial changes. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, has the story.
The pressure's been mounting for the government to address the challenges facing the beleaguered media industry. Recent news that MediaWorks' TV arm is up for sale and that TVNZ expects to post a $17 million annual loss just ratcheted up that pressure. An advisory group, including RNZ, TVNZ and a range of public sector agencies, has concluded the status quo is unsustainable. It's recommending the creation of a whole new entity with statutory editorial independence and a public service mandate, funded by both the Crown and commercial revenue. The Broadcasting Minister, Chris Farfoy, a former TVNZ reporter, was giving nothing away at Parliament today.
I am not going to go into any detail until I've had a discussion with my Cabinet colleagues and made a decision. At the moment, we've made no secret that we're looking at it. Once a decision is made, I'll answer some of those questions.
The proposal could be considered by Cabinet within weeks, but National's leader Simon Bridges says the government lacks the mandate to make such a major change.
A combined state broadcaster would be worrying for New Zealand. I think it'd be far too powerful, and that's bad for democracy. I mean, look, where it took an editorial line, and it inevitably would, that would become the received wisdom, if you like.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says leaving public broadcasting as it is not an option.
I think ultimately the choice is either we make decisions that bolster public broadcasting or we choose to do nothing. And I don't think doing nothing is an option.
Peter Thompson from Better Public Media says forcing RNZ and TVNZ together could create some fundamental problems.
I'd be extremely cautious about the proposal to fund the new entity by a mixed commercial public funding system, because I think there are distinctive functions between the commercial side and the public service side, and putting them together hasn't worked too well in the past.
Jacinda Ardern was asked if Labour would campaign on any major change.
We already campaigned on a platform of public broadcasting, and I think what we're seeing now demonstrates why that's important.
Simon Bridges says any change should only be made with bipartisan support.
So that it is an enduring set of solutions. And look, if it's not, I think that National would need to consider unwinding a solution it disagreed with if it was in office.
The New Zealand First MP Jenny Marcroft says there are some fundamental issues her party's discussing with the Broadcasting Minister.
What do we do to ensure our public broadcasters remain in a position where they are relevant, that they are providing news that is trustworthy, and that they hold powers to be to account, and that's their role as the fourth estate, and those are the discussions that we've been having over the last little while.
The Greens co-leader James Shaw says his party is open to some change.
We haven't settled on a position yet, but the priority, and this will come as no great surprise hearing this from the Greens, is that we've always thought that good public interest, news and information is really critically important. So interested to see what the options are.
So you're open to some reform or changes in this sector?
Yeah, look, obviously the media is under huge pressure, and I don't need to tell you that, right? And has been for some time, and that trend is continuing. So it is going to require, some intervention.
Peter Thompson Thompson says there are still several key questions about how the new entity would work.
Whether or not you create a single entity in a single building, whether you keep the current dispersed offices across the country. There are all sorts of logistical and governance questions that might have financial implications, and it's impossible to cost that before we've actually seen the blueprint.
Neither RNZ nor TVNZ would make any comment today about the proposal. If the plan does get the go-ahead, a business case and other details like timeframe and cost would be finalised next year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, hundreds of protesters marched on Parliament today saying forestry is gobbling up farms. Calls for the government to save more Māori women's lives by immediately funding a DIY test for the virus that causes many cervical cancers. And an Aussie family's battle to save their home against the odds in an out-of-control bushfire. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far tonight. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The man accused of murdering Grace Millane told police he confessed about burying the British backpacker so her family could have closure. The 27-year-old made the comment in his second police interview, the recording of which was played to the jury in the High Court today. The man initially lied about the last time he saw Ms Millane, but then admitted he choked her during sex and woke up to find her dead in his room. The Crown called its final witness this afternoon and has closed its case. The new head of the Royal Commission into State and Faith-Based Care says her first major task will be assuring survivors the Commission is worthy of their trust. Judge Coral Shaw replaces Sir Anand Satyanand as chair of the 5-person inquiry. Some survivors lost trust in the Commission when it was revealed a convicted paedophile had mixed with abuse survivors at Commission-related functions. Judge Shaw told Checkpoint the Commission has since introduced compulsory vetting for advisors and their support people. Legislation aimed at easing the trauma sexual violence victims face when testifying in open court is having its first reading in Parliament. The Sexual Violence Legislation Bill proposes that unless a judge gives permission, a witness cannot be asked about their sexual history with the defendant or their sexual disposition. The Mental Health Foundation believes new armed units being trialled by the police will result in people experiencing mental health crises being shot. The special patrols are aimed at cutting down response times in serious call-outs where firearms are involved. The Foundation's chief executive says tasers are already disproportionately used in cases involving mental illness. The Chief Ombudsman says senior Christchurch City Council managers altered reports that reflected negatively on the council when responding to information requests. The council has been slammed in an investigation revealing how the executive leadership team controlled the flow of information. The Ombudsman says he has never seen breaches on such a scale. The council says it accepts the report and is working to improve its processes. Those are the latest news headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to business now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona. Goodwin Property Trust, right, they have reported a big increase in their first half profit.
Yeah, Goodwin Property Trust, they made a tenfold increase in the valuation gains that they had on their portfolio.
Right.
So that's 10 times more gain than they made the year before. And that worked out to lift their profit four times more than they made the year before. And these are half-year results, so massive numbers. And we're talking about $224.3 million was the profit. Mm-hmm. And about 175 of that was valuation gains on their portfolio, which is now worth about $3 billion. And that's mostly industrial property in Auckland. So it's been a really a strong market for them. A lot of other competition wanting to buy into that market with a 100% occupancy nearly in their portfolio and right across the board.
Interesting. Okay, so also on the markets, New Zealand oil and gas. What's going on with this takeover?
Well, I was actually going to tell you, though, that we have house prices as well.
Oh, do we?
Yeah, so just wanted to mention that because our house prices, the market looks like it's on the move again, with the median house price rising 7.6% nationally, still lagging in Auckland a little bit, but the house market is also heating up. And so New Zealand oil and gas, just turning to that, New Zealand oil and gas, the market rejected, the minority shareholders rejected the scheme of arrangement takeover, which had been supported by the board today. That saw the share price drop, about nearly 5%. So the company was, the offer was from the majority owner. That's OG Oil and Gas. They were trying to buy the 30% stake they don't already own. Well, they weren't able to buy it. This doesn't happen that often. We've seen very few times where takeover offers don't succeed. More recently, Kathmandu, for example, when Rod Duke from Briscoe tried to buy Kathmandu, that failed as well. There was a partial takeover of Abano Healthcare that also failed. So anyway, overall, Goodman's share price, it rose 0.25% today. And overall, the index rose 0.6%, 64 points up to 10,899. The New Zealand dollar, 63.9 US cents, 94 Australian and 49.8 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business. Former Inspector Hurimoana Dennis is standing by his actions and insists he was a good cop despite scathing reports revealing he abused his power as well as unlawfully detaining a teenager in 2015. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has released 2 reports into Mr Dennis that highlight serious misconduct on more than one occasion. Our Māori News correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
Today's reports are yet another blow to the already fragile reputation of Hurimoana Dennis, who retired last year after serving 32 years in the police. In 2015, he was charged with kidnapping after locking a 17-year-old boy in a cell and later detaining him at the airport police station as a way of pressuring him to leave his underage girlfriend. A jury ultimately acquitted Mr Dennis and another officer who was also charged. Despite that, the authority says on the balance of probability, he did act unlawfully. But Mr Dennis stands by his actions and says he's just misunderstood.
It is disappointing, but I'm not surprising that they've come up with that sort of response because, one, they didn't really understand and appreciate the role of a new liaison officer in the police. Well, the IPCA certainly didn't ask me what I did in the police. 2, I think this is 2 worldviews about how you manaki and look after people.
During the authority's investigation, it discovered other cases where Mr Dennis misused his authority between 2013 and 2017. For example, he unsuccessfully tried to convince a traffic officer not to give him a speeding ticket. He tried to influence his cousin's court case by writing a character reference and stipulating his position in the force. Before that, the authority also found that Mr Dennis tried to pull a few strings to get his son off a charge relating to an iPhone scam. But he's not backing down.
From a kaupapa Māori perspective, you should get in behind your whānau, particularly when they're admitting they're at fault. I thought that was the right thing to do. And the main thing is that my son was held to account, just like everybody else.
Mr Dennis has been working for Te Puia Marae, helping hundreds of people out of homelessness. He insists that he's a good cop and says he always acted in accordance with Māori law and tikanga.
Not everything's in alphabetical order when it comes to your role as a new liaison officer. But I am proud of what I've done, Lee. I don't want these incidents to define me. 32 years worth of commitment in service to my community and to my people. I think it's a bit unfair.
Acting Deputy Commissioner of Police Andy Costa says it's disappointing that everything went so wrong with the teenager in 2015. But he rejects the claim that Mr Dennis was acting in accordance with Māori tikanga. He says that has to occur within the law anyway.
The complainant in this case was a young Māori man, and it is clear that these events in no way helped him. In fact, they were very damaging. So we would beg to differ on the perspective that this was somehow legitimate under the banner of tikanga Māori.
However, the police aren't in the clear either. The reports reveal police dismissed things they should not have and kept information from the authority. They found no one had full oversight of the inquiry into Mr Dennis, and police didn't properly investigate the actions of everyone involved in detaining the teenager. It also shows that some officers did try to help Mr Dennis.
In no way are we comfortable with the events that are disclosed by these reports. We consider them to be isolated, and we acknowledge that there's opportunity for police to improve our handling of disciplinary matters such as these.
The Police Association was not available for comment, but in a statement it says the key lesson from the reports is for officers to make sure they're open about any conflicts of interest. Mo te hōtaka o te ata, ko li Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
Hundreds of farmers marched on Parliament today saying the countryside risks being swamped by tree planting and their livelihoods risk going to the wall. They say slow-growing trees do not pay for jobs or services in small towns, and a traditional way of life is under threat. Eric Frickberg was at the protest and filed this report.
Headed by a tractor and backed up by a huge transport truck, the protesters poured onto Parliament grounds today, saying they risk paying a terminal price to make up for other people's greenhouse gas emissions. They say government policy is shoehorning foreign investors into owning land as long as they plant trees. And as land disappears under trees, the daily hum of the rural economy is replaced by a 25-year wait for tree harvesting day. Gisborne farmer Kerry Worsnop told the crowd there's a big price to pay for what the government is doing.
It is our infrastructure, our rural communities, our economic diversity, and to a certain extent, our identity as a nation.
The argument from the 50 Shades of Green protest group is that trees are being used as a carbon offset for unending consumption of fossil fuels, and farmers who don't cause that problem end up paying for it. But when the Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, got up in front of the crowd and tried to argue that the claims of afforestation are exaggerated, he got a hostile reception.
Can I say that in sticking to the facts, the vast majority of farms that have been sold for forest planting have been purchased by New Zealanders. Well, it's the facts, whether you want to stick to them or not.
His colleague, the Forestry Minister Shane Jones, got an even rougher ride and responded by bursting into song.
Welcome, farmers! Welcome!
But Shane Jones was much less sympathetic in a later interview.
I am not going to back down or keep quiet in the face of a National Party rally. The National Party voted for the climate change legislation, so I thought I would thank them in front of their supporters.
Minister, this isn't the National Party rally, these are farmers.
These are people who are antagonistic to what the government is doing. But look, I'm up to a Shane Jones. If you're going to shout over me, you're never ever going to win. That's my message to anyone coming to Parliament.
That message didn't go down well with protester Lincoln Grant, who farms sheep and beef near Pahiatua.
It's ruining our rural communities, it's having a major impact on our rural towns, and for no good reason. It is not going to meet our climate change objectives. It's just a scapegoat, easy way to make it look like we're doing something.
Lincoln Grant says projects like renewable energy would have a far bigger impact. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Core Eric Frickberg, 10A.
Corrections is calling for more powers to read, copy and store letters coming in and out of prisons, now that a review of its mail system has identified deficiencies in the law. The independent review was ordered in August after a botch-up allowed the accused Christchurch mosque gunman to send 2 letters from his cell that should not have been allowed out. It was a major blunder involving New Zealand's highest profile inmate. Now it's brought to light a litany of problems with the wider prison mail system. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It was a major blunder involving New Zealand's highest profile inmate. Now it's brought to light a litany of problems within the wider prison mail system.
We had a problem and now we're just fixing it.
The Corrections Minister, Calvin Davis, is waiting on advice from his department on what further law changes might be needed to improve the screening of letters in and out of prison.
Obviously the system has been, I believe, poorly run, the mail system, for a number of years, and we're now getting on making the changes that need to be made.
An independent report was ordered after the accused mosque attacker managed to send 2 letters that should have been blocked. One was later posted online. The review makes 13 recommendations, all 13 accepted by the corrections boss, Christine Stevenson.
So we've already got 8 recommendations which we have underway, and the remaining few will be started on in the next month.
The report recommends dedicated mail teams be set up in each prison to check outgoing letters and proposes regular audits and clearer guidelines. But it says there are problems with the law too. Prison staff can't copy the letters which come across their desks, and they're very limited in what they can pass on to their intelligence teams. The review also says officials and MPs need to consider whether they should be able to block letters on the simple grounds that they're indecent.
Look, I think when our Act was passed in 2004, we were in a different world.
Corrections staff can't copy mail. We think that needs to change, but they'll be providing advice to me around that.
As for the accused Christchurch gunman, all letters to and from him now have to be signed off by Ms Stevenson. But despite all the changes, still, no guarantee a similar mistake couldn't happen again.
I think with 15,000 and more items of mail leaving our prisons every week, I think guaranteeing would be beyond what I can do. What I am confident in is we have totally strengthened our system.
The opposition is calling the review a smokescreen, a way for corrections and the minister to evade responsibility. National's David Bennett says the letters could and should have been blocked under the law at the time.
They didn't do their job. They let that prisoner send out mail when he shouldn't have. They should just take responsibility for that and not try to hide behind further changes to make it look like they didn't make a mistake in the first place when they did.
Corrections says it apologised and acted and is now moving as quickly as possible to implement the recommendations.
That's what we have to do, and that's what we're doing.
You said at the time that you didn't have confidence in the mail screening system. Do you now?
I have more confidence than I did, that's for sure.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It is about 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There are calls for the government to save more Māori women's lives by immediately funding a DIY test for the virus that causes many cervical cancers. Māori women are more than twice as likely to be diagnosed with cervical cancer and 3 times more likely to die from it than Pākehā women. The DIY swab test for the human papilloma virus, or HPV, can be used by women at home instead of having to visit a doctor for a smear test. Lady Tureti Moxon is the chair of the National Urban Māori Authority and is among those making the case for funding for the tests. I asked her why we need the DIY test when we already have a cervical screening program.
Empowering women to do it for themselves in the comfort of their own homes. It's a less invasive way of doing things, but they are in charge, you know. And I think that that's very important. And it's a simple test, and it doesn't have to be made into something scary or, and a lot of women feel this, of course, when they go in to have a cervical smear, that they feel that it's so invasive that they don't want to do that. But in this way, they can do it for themselves and do it in a way that they themselves are in control.
You've seen the test, had a look at it?
Yes.
And
well, it's like a long cotton bud.
Yep.
It's like a long cotton bud, and then you insert that into your whare tangata.
Yep.
You insert that there, and then you bring it out and put it into a plastic container and close it up.
And send it away.
And then send it.
So why aren't Māori women in particular engaging in the cervical screening program?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, and part of it is really about convenience too. Some of them don't feel comfortable being with male doctor. Some others don't feel comfortable even lying on a bed and having someone else looking at them. So there's lots of different reasons, and some of it is just transport. Some of it is just that too many children, too many competing things going on in their lives. There's a whole lot of reasons. But if they did it for themselves and then all they had to do was to drop it off somewhere, then that's done, and then we can follow them up and let them know whether there's anything to worry about.
How many Māori women are engaging with the screening program?
66%.
Versus how many Pākehā women?
80%.
So there's a big gap.
Yes, there are.
And you listed some of the reasons for that, convenience, embarrassment, would be fair to say, wouldn't it?
And I think that they would probably be more happy to try this method than they would to go into a surgery, for example, and have it done to them. And I think that it's better that they're doing it for themselves.
So what's the obstacles to making this happen right now then?
Well, the government's not funding it. That's the short answer of it. And they were supposed to start funding this last year, but they've put it off for another 3 to 4 years. And how many people? If we really ask ourselves, how many people are going to die? How many women are going to die if something radical? And it's not that radical, really. It's actually common sense. Isn't done.
So what do you think about the fact it's delayed again?
Well, I'm a bit over it, really, because I just think that the inequities in New Zealand between Māori health and everybody else's health is an issue which we need to deal with, and we need to deal with it immediately. And we can't wait until everybody is ready in 2 or 3 years. I mean, again, I say, how many women need to die before we think that it's important enough for us to do something about it? So I'm saying that it needs to come into effect immediately.
So what do you think that tells you about the value that is placed on Māori women's lives?
Yeah, well, actually, to be honest, it's an issue that goes right across the health spectrum. And certainly with our women, we are missing out because the biggest cancers, one of the 4 biggest cancers, cervical and breast screening are the worst. And then, of course, there's lung and then there's bowel. But we have to do something different. And we have to engage our women, and we have to empower our women to do this for themselves, because doing to them is that's sort of, as my daughter often says to me, old school. So we need to have new ways of doing things, and it's a game changer. It's been said before, and it needs to happen and happen soon. And I would implore the government to rethink that and really start thinking about and we talk a lot about inequities and inequalities and all of that, but actually we're not doing a lot about it.
So when you talk to Māori women, do they say to you, oh yeah, I'd use that? What are they saying?
Well, these women who were a part of the pilot all had a go at it, and and in actual fact, they were picked up. It was picked up quite quickly, those who actually needed to have more support beyond, who actually had something to worry about. But
so the pilot already has improved outcomes.
It has
for
improved
women.
outcomes, and I think that's what we need to be doing: looking for ways in which we can improve outcomes and get people to engage. We just think that the same way that we've been doing things for 100 years, it's about 20 years, 30 years, is working for today's woman and tomorrow's women. But we need to be always thinking of different ways in which we can connect and communicate and get them to participate.
So your message, straight to the government now, what is it?
This is a very, very important issue for Māori women. It's one of our biggest killers, and basically we would like this funded, and we would like this funded now, and we would like this funded as a matter of urgency.
So when you say urgency, what does that mean?
That means not waiting for the current program, which is 3 to 4 years, but doing it now. And I think that it can be done, and it should be done, and we should be doing everything we can to make it, to make it happen. In fact, it should be starting at this moment in time, if not now, this year, certainly by next year.
So next budget?
Definitely by next budget.
Any idea how much it would cost them?
Well, no, I'm not sure the full cost of this, but I'm sure it's going to be cheaper than what they're paying for it now.
What's your message to Māori women?
E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā hau e whā, ngā wāhine toa. He pānui tēnei kia koutou, ki te whakarongo ki tēnei kōrero, ki te haere ki tō tākuta I nāia nei, mā te wā, e mahi ana koe tēnei mahi tau. Haere ki reira, ki te āwhina, rātau e āwhina I a koutou, ki te mahi I ngā mahi mō ngā wāhine. Kia kaha, ko koutou mā te ngā wāhine toa I roto I tō whānau, I roto I tō hapu, I roto I tō iwi. Kia kaha tātou.
And that was Lady Moxon talking to me about, her call for this DIY HPV kit to be funded. And her words are online and on our webpage along with a translation. An Australian woman has told her story of survival after battling 7 hours through the night to save her house from a deadly bushfire. Anne Windress, her husband Mick and 2 relatives used hoses and buckets to stave off flames they say were 30 to 40 feet high on their Johns River property near Port Macquarie on Friday night. The firestorm that firefighters say was the worst they'd ever seen claimed the life of their next-door neighbour. While she managed to save the house, some of the farm animals are still suffering. Anne Windress spoke to Alex Perrottet just after burying her cow.
We had actually went out to tea because it had calmed down a bit in the afternoon, so we headed off into Laurelton and had some Chinese. Come back and the whole place was just red. It's still a fair way away, so my husband and my brother and sister-in-law, they all went off to bed, but I said, no, I'm waiting up for the southerly. So about 10 o'clock, it sounded like a freight train coming. And I looked out the bedroom window and the whole place was just red. And within a minute, we were showered with embers and the fight started.
So you woke everyone up?
I had to, yeah. Well, I screamed. I had to scream. They all got up pretty quick and it was full on for the next 7 hours. It was frightening. Don't want to go through that again.
Did anyone get badly hurt?
Well, our neighbour was killed, yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, she lost her life.
And so how close, how nearby is the neighbour?
Just the next paddock over. We actually heard 3 explosions go off from her place, which was probably the gas bottles and car or tractor or something. Yeah, it was a bit frightening, but there's no way if we'd had realised and knew what was going on, we may have been able to get over the paddocks to her, but it was a bit chaotic, we had to stay and fight for our home. So I did panic. I'm an avid animal lover, so I grabbed my dogs. Couldn't find the 4 cats, but I grabbed the dogs and put them in the car and ran the car out into the middle of the paddock where I thought they'd be safe. And, just ran back and started putting out spot fires.
How'd you do that?
Just with a watering can, actually. We only had 2 garden hoses going, and one had about 3 splits in it, so there was water going everywhere, but I suppose it didn't matter. We needed the water. But luckily that morning we had just got a load of water for our tanks because we were just about out, so someone's looking after us.
Yeah, that's all right. The fences are going to be refixed. It's the trees that go up when they blow with the ashes this place. Yeah. The ashes you've got to worry about. I'll go down the back.
So it was that water you used up to pour all over those flames?
Yes, yeah, yep.
And was the fire service nearby or were you on your own?
No, we were on our own. No, they came down about 3 hours later. I did call 000, but when they finally turned up about 3 hours later, they said that we were actually right at the forefront of the worst firestorm they've ever witnessed. So they said once a firestorm hits, there's nothing they can do. They've just got to stand back and wait.
So how successful were you with those flames? They looked really close to the house.
They were close, yes. Flames were about 30, 40 foot high. That was about 20 metres from our house. and the grass burnt within 10 metres. Yeah, we just kept putting it out. As soon as we saw it running across the lawn, and a fence post would go up, so we'd throw another bucket of water over that, and it was pretty hectic for quite a few hours.
So you were hours with your backs to the wall, effectively, throwing buckets of water on flames, protecting your home?
Yes. Yes.
It must have been exhausting.
We were just showered in embers. Yeah, we were very lucky. We lost Mum about a year ago, and a flame, one of the embers got under her little granny flat, and I ran over and put it out. But at that time, I suppose, I don't know, I'd had enough, and I looked up in the sky and I said, I thought it's useless, we've lost it. And I looked up in the sky and I said, Mum, we need help. And yeah, hours later it was saved, and we walked in 5 a.m. in the morning to our bar, absolutely knackered, my husband and I, and had a Jack Daniels and a beer for brekkie, and I found a white feather at my foot. So that was, to me, a message from Mum saying, we did it. Yeah.
And that was Anne Windress talking to Alex Perrottet. And fire conditions have eased along Australia's eastern seaboard, with no blazes currently burning at emergency level. And we will put that interview online. There are some amazing photos that Anne took during that battle.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Crown has closed its case in the trial of the man accused of murdering Grace Millane. Today, the jury watched the 27-year-old defendant's second formal interview with the police, in which he described sobbing and vomiting as he put the British backpacker's body in a suitcase. Sarah Robson has been in the High Court at Auckland.
In the interview, the accused backtracked on his initial story and told the police he woke up and found Grace Millane dead on the floor of his apartment. He said he was scared and put her body in a suitcase and buried it in a shallow grave in the Waitakere Ranges. In the recording, the man was asked by his lawyer why he gave the police more information. He said he wanted to give Ms Millane's family closure. Detective Inspector Scott Beard, who led the investigation into Ms Millane's disappearance, told the jury they were never able to recover the items Ms Millane had with her that night. The Crown called its final witness this afternoon and has closed its case. The trial will resume on Monday. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The new head of the Royal Commission into State and Faith-Based Care says her first major task is to assure survivors the Commission is worthy of their trust. Judge Coral Shaw replaces Sir Anand Satyanand as chair of the 5-person inquiry. Some survivors lost trust in the Commission this year when it was revealed a convicted paedophile, who was the partner of a member of the Survivors Advisory Group, mixed with the abuse survivors at Commission-related functions. Judge Shaw told Checkpoint the Commission has since introduced compulsory vetting for advisors and their support people.
Anything that looks like the state or an institution is automatically, I think, they see us as part of that abusing organisation. And the only way that we can get over that is to demonstrate that we are worthy of trust.
Judge Shaw says she is sorry if any survivors felt she had minimised their experiences regarding the paedophile being involved, as it was not her intention. The head of the Christchurch City Council says she fully accepts a damning report into how it handles official information requests. The Chief Ombudsman says senior managers altered reports that reflected negatively on the council when responding to requests from the public and councillors. He takes aim at former Chief Executive Carleen Edwards, who left the job this year for failing to deal with the problem, and says he has never before seen such serious breaches. The current Chief Executive, Dawn Baxendale, says she is committed to bringing about a cultural change.
It is important that we take this report seriously and that we take to heart the issues that are in there, and importantly as well that we have a culture that does not prevent staff from raising things, whichever way they need to do so.
Dawn Baxendale says all staff will be trained in how to comply with the law around information requests. The former police inspector Euthanasia Dennis is standing by his actions despite reports saying he abused his power and unlawfully detained a 17-year-old in 2015. He was acquitted of kidnapping charges relating to the youth. However, the Independent Police Conduct Authority says he did act outside the law. It also says Mr Dennis misused his authority to try to influence criminal cases involving two different family members. Euthanasia Dennis, who retired last year, says he did what he thought was right, and these incidents should not define his 32 years of service to his community and his people. Police in Queensland have charged a 16-year-old boy with starting a bushfire in central Queensland that destroyed 14 homes. The charges come as Queensland's firefighters are again concentrating on strengthening containment lines and extinguishing existing fires before the weather deteriorates over the weekend. 75 bushfires are still burning across the state, with 8 watch and act warnings in place. Meanwhile, the death toll in New South Wales has risen to 4 after a man's body was found in burnt-out bushland near Kempsey on the mid-north coast. The space sector has contributed almost $1.7 billion to New Zealand's economy in the last financial year. A new report released by the Economic Development Minister today reveals the industry employs 12,000 people, both directly and indirectly. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
The report by Deloitte was commissioned by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and Phil Twyford says it shows New Zealand's space economy is driven almost entirely by the private sector. Successful New Zealand company, Rocket Lab, has played a key part in the growth. Its chief executive, Peter Beck, says the company's biggest obstacle to further growth is getting enough skilled workers. Mr Twyford says there are no plans for any significant government investment in the sector, apart from ensuring the regulatory framework is there for private businesses to get a decent start in the space industry. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
Auckland health authorities say the number of new measles cases has risen for the first time in about 2 months. Last week, 43 cases were confirmed, slightly up on the week before. Nationwide, the number of cases has now topped 2,000, most in Auckland. Public health officials say people must continue to be vigilant. It's 6:05. The All Whites are sweating on the fitness of striker Chris Wood ahead of their match against Ireland in Dublin tomorrow. Wood, who plays for Burnley in the English Premier League, sat out the All Whites training today with a leg injury. Coach Danny Hay says he will hold off making a decision until as late as possible.
We just need to see how he pulls up. We don't want to take any unnecessary risks. We understand that it is a friendly, but like Winston, Chris is desperate to play. So if he's fit, he'll play.
It is Danny Hay's first match as All Whites coach. The former Newcastle Knights coach Nathan Brown is to join the Warriors as a specialist coach in one of several staff changes for next season. Former Wallabies strength and conditioning coach Craig Twentyman will also work under the head coach Stephen Kearney to try to turn around a disappointing 2019 in which the Warriors finished 13th in the 16-team competition. The New Zealand women's basketball team will have a rare home court advantage tonight when they play the Philippines in their opening match of an Olympic qualifying tournament in Auckland. It's the side's first home game in 4 years. The most successful tennis doubles team of all time, identical twins Mike and Bob Bryan, have announced that they will retire at the 2020 US Open. The 41-year-old Americans have won a record 16 Grand Slam men's doubles titles, 118 career titles and an Olympic gold medal together. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance looks at attempts to rid Wellington's Miramar Peninsula of rats. There's a window on the world of edible packaging. If you can't trash it, eat it. Although I guess some of it still ends up going down the toilet. And this week's overseas correspondent Reem Abbas is on the line from Sudan, which may be on the way back to some sort of civilian government. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine weather. Isolated showers becoming confined to the west tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including central high country and Wairarapa. Showers, possibly squally thunderstorms tonight. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine with high cloud. Bulla to Fiordland and Stewart Island, periods of rain with heavy falls. Thunderstorms north of the glaciers tonight. Nelson and Marlborough, north of Kaikoura Ranges. Showers becoming widespread this evening with possible thunderstorms and hail. Fine weather tomorrow, apart from scattered showers tomorrow night. Kaikoura Coast, Canterbury and North Otago. Isolated showers and possible thunderstorms tonight, becoming fine tomorrow morning. Southland excluding Stewart Island, Central Otago and Dunedin. Showers with possible thunderstorms tonight, high cloud and scattered rain tomorrow. Chatham Islands, periods of rain and low cloud. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna, and thank you for tuning in. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Kaikoura business owners say stress and sadness from dealing with insurance companies still hangs over them. 3 years to the day, a massive earthquake rocked the town. On November 14th, 2016, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake devastated the upper east coast of the South Island. Kaikoura was among the worst hit, destroying homes, businesses, roads and the main rail line. While the roads have mostly reopened, trains are back running and tourists are returning, some Kaikoura locals are struggling to move on. They say getting insurance paid out in the aftermath of the quake has been like getting blood out of a stone, and it's taking a toll on their health. Our video journalist Logan Church travelled to Kaikoura this week and he filed this story.
When I came down on the morning after the quake, my shop was pretty much everything was just upside down. Topsy-turvied. I think I was just in the firing line of the quake.
Penny Betts runs Gecko Gears. She imports clothes from Nepal to sell in Kaikoura. After the November 2016 quake, she was barred from her building. However, she quickly managed to get access so she could start selling again. But it was hard. Most of her customers are tourists and they weren't coming anymore. She persevered, and when the road reopened, the tourists came back. Her building, however, was a different story.
The flooring is now, it's all uneven. There's a lot of cosmetic damage in here, you know, there's cracking. There's damage on the outside wall. That's structure, it goes into the substructure of the wall. Where the building joins, it's separated, tiles are all damaged behind us. There's quite a bit. There's the veranda out the front is propped up. People think that I've got the props here just to make the shop look pretty, to put clothes on, but it's actually holding up veranda and the whole sort of thing from falling forward.
She is insured through the insurance brokers Crombie Lockwood. Assessors came early on, but...
It's been 3 years. Nothing's changed for me, nothing's resolved. It's like I've had my own engineers as well. There seems to be this disparity in the damage and what's earthquake damage and what's not.
Penny says her engineers believe the building will cost about $300,000 to fix, but she says her insurer has only offered her $33,000.
There was a scope given away back, and but it's not covering everything.
A third engineer was sent up in May to try and come up with a resolution, but Penny has yet to hear the outcome of their visit. Crombie Lockwood told us they are in regular contact with Penny, and her claim is complicated. They say they're waiting for the outcome of an engineering peer review, which was that visit in May. After that's finished, and their loss adjuster has looked at the review, they expect to make a new settlement offer. In the meantime, Penny's thrown herself into a new business venture, selling package tours to the Maldives. But she says the damaged building is holding her back from moving on.
I had an opportunity to set up a business in the Maldives, in Adu, and when this was presented to me, I was kind of like, well, why not, you know? Who wouldn't want to go to the Maldives and set up a business there?
But with this building, she's really just had enough.
I'd like my money for this building so that I can then decide what I want to do with my life. I'd like to move away from here, that's my plan. I want to move out of here, move overseas.
Penny's story is sadly a common one in the township.
I went to bed on November the 13th, 2016, as oblivious as everybody was to what was about to happen.
And what happened turned David McKee's world upside down. He's the town's pharmacist. The day after the earthquake, he went into work and found that every piece of stock, medicine, makeup, sunscreen, everything was on the floor.
I could tell the pharmacy was in a bad way. Walls were leaning in directions the walls shouldn't lean. I sort of poked my nose in and thought, I don't really want to hang around in here too much.
David hoped dealing with his insurance company would be simple. He moved into a temporary building nearby, which he knew he could only have for 2 years. Surely plenty of time to get his claim resolved and a new building built.
That time frame could have been achievable if the insurers had played ball, but they, just like Christchurch, deny, delay.
David and his engineers believed the old building, worth $1.1 million, was a write-off. He says the insurance company offered $200,000. He doesn't want to name the insurance company as he has since settled and got all the money he asked for. But he says getting money out of them was like trying to get blood out of a stone, and dealing with their loss adjusters a complete nightmare.
One woman at the insurance company said to me on the phone, I said to her, you know, we've got a contract with the DHB, we've got to provide these services. And she said, yep, that's right, you have a contract, we don't. I think they thought we were country fools. It's honestly what I believe.
3 years on, and after spending last summer operating out of a shipping container, David and his 6 staff are in a brand new pharmacy, designed and built exactly how we wanted it.
Planning a pharmacy from scratch was not something I ever thought I'd need to do. But having done it, it's been quite a rewarding exercise. It's nice to have something that you've planned, and it works. And it works really well. It's brilliant.
It's taken its toll though. Only weeks ago, David was at his hairdresser's. They noticed some of his hair was falling out. He's now bald. And David blames that entirely on the stress that he's been through over the past 3 years.
My hat collection's grown a lot.
Is that one of your hats there?
It's a little bit too much like Breaking Bad, which I don't think's that good for a chemist.
It's been a long road.
I need to thank my staff. Couldn't have done this without them, no way. Typical. Oh. It's always good to have a minor meltdown.
It's been a journey though, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's nice to be at the back of it, really is.
And if you were listening to that one on the drive home, Logan's piece will go up on our website and Facebook page. A case that has gripped the nation for nearly 3 decades reached the country's highest court today, 2 months after the death of the man at the centre of it all. Peter Ellis served 7 years of a 10-year jail sentence for abusing 7 children at the Christchurch Civic Creche, where he worked in 1991. He always maintained his innocence, and 3 convictions were overturned in 1994 after one of the children said she lied. Today, the case was before the Supreme Court as Peter Ellis's lawyers continued their battle to clear his name. Jonathan Mitchell has more.
2 police investigations, 2 trips to the Court of Appeal, a ministerial inquiry, and 3 petitions calling for independent reviews. The Peter Ellis case has been the subject of thousands of news articles, documentaries and debate for decades. Ellis always maintained his innocence, refusing to even attend parole hearings because he would have been forced to admit the accusations were true. The original 16 charges were based on the preschooler's testimony of satanic ritual abuse and torture. Ellis's legal team filed an application for leave to appeal in July to consider whether there was a miscarriage of justice due to the children's evidence being improperly obtained, a lack of expert evidence and unreliable expert evidence at his trial. He died in early September after battling bladder cancer. Today his case continued, this time at the country's highest court. Ellis's lawyer Rob Harrison told the Supreme Court there is jurisdiction to hear the appeal and it has general public importance.
It seems clear from the Crown submissions that the issue of jurisdiction has been conceded to the extent that they agree that, pursuant to Rule 5.2 of the Supreme Court rules, the Court does have jurisdiction to proceed where there has been the death of an appellant.
He says Peter Ellis's dying wish was for it to be heard.
what he was most emphatic about was that we continue in the best way that we thought appropriate.
Mr Harrison acknowledges it's a difficult situation and mentioned the general stress on the Ellis family and for the complainants.
Whether or not there is guilt or innocence, and that is unfortunate in that there is no eventual closure to date for the families, but the nature of this particular case and the way in which it was brought about is always going to have that odour to it, if you like.
In the Crown submission to the Supreme Court, Una Jagos QC says Peter Ellis's death changes the situation.
Because when the appellant dies, his interests die too. And I accept and acknowledge the interests of those who mourn the dead appellant or support him, and they have interests that deserve recognition. But those interests are of much less substance in the balance, in my submission, that your honours must now undertake than the appellant's interests were when he was alive.
She says the interest of the complainants have to be taken into account. Further written submissions will be filed before the Supreme Court over the coming weeks, before the justices make their final decision. In Wellington for Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
Opponents of euthanasia are warning that politicians haven't taken their concerns into account after voting through David Seymour's bill. Lawyers, doctors and now a mental health nurse have spoken up, believing they can still convince a majority of voters to say no to voluntary euthanasia at next year's referendum. But David Seymour says they are scaremongering and all the facts are on his side of the debate. Alex Perrottet reports.
David Seymour says it's been 4 years of long suffering.
Hugely thankful to the multi-party team, to my staff, to the Epsom electorate and the ACT party for getting me elected and making it all possible. And for people such as Russell McVeigh, who've given us huge amounts of pro bono help.
But opponents are dismayed. Dr Sinead Donnelly says this week her online letter attracted its 1,500th signature. That's 1,500 doctors who say no to euthanasia.
Reaching that target at this time just reflects the deep concern of doctors about the role that this bill implicates them in and the impact that it will have on the practice of medicine. This bill actually puts, a knife through the heart of medicine.
Dion Howard is a registered nurse working in mental health and says 21 mental health workers penned another letter to MPs ahead of last night's vote, warning of what they say are links between euthanasia and the suicide rate in some countries. He says he has first-hand experience of his young clients using the same reasons for their suicidal inclinations as euthanasia advocates.
So they'd use things like bodily autonomy and unbearable suffering, and quite articulately as well. So, of course, that when you're working with someone who has chronic suicidality, you factor in every possible risk that may sort of shift that needle for them.
He says the government has a duty of care for the vulnerable and says David Seymour hasn't proven that the regime of euthanasia in the law is safe.
Our Prime Minister has said one suicide is one too many. We have a trending suicide rate that, is the worst that it's been since the 1990s, and yet we're just so readily dismissing a duty of care. And that's simply what we're saying is the onus of proof rests on the proponents of the bill, not the opponents, to say that it is safe.
But David Seymour says the debate has been rigorous and so is his law, and claims that an increased suicide rate relates to euthanasia are not rigorous.
Let's be honest, they are now using terms like suggestive evidence. Now, that is not an academic term. That is not evidence. That is speculation masquerading as evidence. And just because somebody has some expertise in a field, doesn't mean they have expertise in another field, such as analysing the actual connection between statistics.
A spokesperson for Lawyers for Vulnerable New Zealanders, Richard McLeod, says their concerns around coercion weren't dealt with in the committee of the whole House, despite many supplementary order papers. He says many people could be taken advantage of.
Coercion and pressure in our vulnerable communities is a really serious and growing problem. We've got the widespread coercive forces of elder abuse. We've got the coercive forces of loneliness and marginalisation, especially amongst our elderly. We've got the coercive force of not wanting to be a burden. And, of course, we've got the coercive force, particularly on Māori, of a healthcare system which is increasingly failing them. And these profound coercive forces already at work need to be checked, and this bill fails dismally in checking them.
But David Seymour says there's no evidence for that.
Actually, the people who avail themselves of assisted dying are people who have the assertiveness in their character, the education, the resources to navigate a fairly arduous system of bureaucratic checks and balances to become eligible.
Dr Sinead Donnelly says she was in the public gallery of Parliament yesterday when MPs were debating and says she's sad that medical professionals have not been respected.
And really just dismayed that people who are lay people, even though they're MPs, would speak in such a, disrespectful way about a group of people who dedicate their life in the service of people who are vulnerable and sick.
David Seymour assures that he and the 68 other MPs who voted in favour are on the right side of history. He says there's 150 million people living in jurisdictions around the world where assisted dying is now legal, though the lawyers for vulnerable New Zealanders say that leaves billions of others around the world who don't. Here in New Zealand, there's over 3.5 million eligible voters set to tick a box next year on their ballot papers, with likely another public debate about just how that tricky question is likely to be worded. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
It's almost 6:25 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The 54th New Zealand Music Awards are about to kick off in Auckland, celebrating the best in Kiwi music. Awards up for grabs tonight are Album of the Year, Single of the Year, Best Pop, Rock, Classical, Hip Hop, and so much more. Charlotte Ryan, host of Music 101, is on the red carpet at Spark Arena and joins us now. Hi Charlotte, who's been nominated there?
Kia ora, Lisa. Oh, well, there's so many nominations this year. The Beths, which is like a punk pop band, they have the most nominations. Ellis is nominated, Troy Kingi, lots of new artists who have just sort of come out of the woodwork in the last couple of years, so it's very exciting.
So who do you reckon?
Although saying that, actually, I was going to say, saying that, there are some classic artists in there. 660, of course, will probably win a couple of awards. And the Dudes, from 40 years ago, they've been inducted into the Hall of Fame. So Dave Dobbin and Peter Ehrlich have just walked past me. And they were welcomed onto the red carpet with this beautiful Māori choir. Yeah.
So who do you reckon's been the standout musician this year?
Oh, I think that's a really hard call, but Aldous Harding has done incredibly well. But actually, the artist I've had my eye on for a while is a 19-year-old girl from Grey Lynn. She's called Benny. She's signed to this massive American record label, Island Records, which has signed all sorts of superstars. But she is just writing hit after hit. She's totally got that X factor. She reminds me of when I first met Lorde, which is such a cliche thing to say, but I'm quite excited by her.
So who are you picking as the winners?
Oh, well, without a doubt, I could say that 660 will win Best Airplay, but that's just because they've been in the charts for so long. I think the Beths should win something. Hopefully Benny wins something. And everyone is calling Aldous Harding to win something. She's up for Best Album and up against all sorts of others, like Avondale Bowling Club, and yeah, it's going to be a really hard call, to be honest. Lots of people are debating on the red carpet who's going to win.
So, it's the Music Awards, so who's performing?
You've got Benny, well, lots of the nominees, which is really exciting. So then if you're unsure who they are, you'll get to see them perform and make your own judgment, I guess. So Benny's performing, the Dudes are performing, and a really beautiful thing about the Dudes performing is that Ian Morris, who was in the Dudes but died a couple of years ago, his daughters will be performing with the Dudes tonight, which is a beautiful tribute to Ian Morris. Also, we've got Troy. Speak of them, Lexa are just here, Ian Morris's daughters.
I heard my name.
Well, I was just about to say, say, you guys are playing live in The Dudes tonight, which is a beautiful tribute because your dad was in the band, right?
Yeah, he was. It's quite an honour, to be honest. Yeah.
I was going to say, are you feeling nervous about performing tonight?
I'm feeling nervous that I'm not nervous. I feel terrified that I'm not nervous. I think I should be nervous, but we've been having fun rehearsing with the guys, and it's been fun. Yeah, it's been good.
Well, good luck. I can't wait to see it. That's Lexa, and they'll be performing with The Dudes later. A beautiful tribute to your father, Ian Morris. Yeah.
Don't you love live radio and TV, Charlotte? Wasn't that opportunistic? Good job there. Hey, thanks for joining us. Have a fantastic night. Catch you soon.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, salmon populations in the northwest United States are in decline, and man-made dams have hindered their migration back to the headwaters where they spawn. But not to worry, a solution has been found in the form of a so-called salmon cannon. Francis Maguire reports.
There's a device in the American Pacific Northwest that is quite literally a salmon cannon. Like a cross between a water slide and a vacuum hose for fish. It blasts them through a rubber tube along the Columbia River and deposits them on the other side of a dam at speeds of 25 feet per second. Why? It's all about helping out the wild salmon stocks and returning them to their river birthplace so they can spawn. Vince Bryan is the CEO of Whoosh Innovations, the company behind the fish launcher.
The dams on the Columbia are large and can be 200 to 500 feet tall. So a traditional ladder system would exhaust the fish to the point that they would never make it to their spawning grounds. So the idea here is to bring in a system, a pneumatic system that doesn't use the energies of the fish to get over the dams, so that they can use those energies to swim up to the headwaters.
The salmon population in northwest United States is in decline. Partly because the fish here face many obstacles, both animal and human, as they journey upstream. The salmon cannon stretches from a barge at the bottom of the dam up the hillside and over the top. At the top is a little barrier the fish jump over and find themselves inside a scanner. The scanner then takes photos that are used to classify the salmon according to species, size, and whether they are wild-born or artificially bred. This is important to ensure that only the right fish ride this roller coaster and end up on the other side of the dam.
That's us for tonight. See you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Crown has closed its case in the trial of the 27-year-old accused of murdering British backpacker Grace Millane. The judge, who today took over as head of the Royal Commission into State and Faith-Based Care, says she wants to assure survivors the Commission is worthy of their trust. Police in Queensland have charged a 16-year-old with starting a bushfire that destroyed 14 homes. And State Highway 6 near Murchison, the main route between Nelson and Christchurch, will be closed for 2 days after a fatal accident in which a boulder rolled onto the road and hit a car. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
As you can imagine, with this sort of conscience vote, there is really polarising views here.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
It also has a number of your countrymen assisting us in that location at the moment. We have 20